The last ball game the St. Louis Browns played was 66 seasons ago. But on a night like this one, you would never know it.
So it was just a bunch of us Browns nuts in a stadium watching baseball. Hear the crack of the bat, smell the popcorn, the beer. It just made it, I think, the closest thing to heaven for most of us.
The second annual Browns Tribute Night, hosted by the Gateway Grizzlies, perfectly illustrates the long reach, loyal membership, and deep community impact of the St. Louis Browns Historical Society and Fan Club. After years filled with losing streaks and roller coaster changes in management, the team was finally sold to Baltimore. The newly named Orioles weren't interested in identifying with the Browns' checkered past and, rumor has it, burned all of their St. Louis uniforms and team records. Without a team to support, Browns fans only had their memories to depend on. Some succumbed reluctantly to the Cardinal fever that was partially responsible for pushing the team out in the first place.
We all became Cardinal fans because it was natural and it wasn't the same.
It would take 30 years, a pilgrimage to Cooperstown, and the conversion of a Brooklyn Dodgers fan for the Browns story to continue. When native New Yorker Bill Borst attended a Hall of Fame induction ceremony in 1984, he was reintroduced to a team he hadn't seen play since he was a boy.
I went to the induction with Pee Wee Reese, and among the others honorees that day was a fellow named Rick Farrell, was a catcher with the St. Louis Browns. And I thought that it's terrible that nobody was ever going to retire his number as they were retiring the other players' numbers. And you could say that the fan club was conceived at Cooperstown and was born in Brentwood, Missouri.
Upon returning to his adopted city of St. Louis, Bill founded the Browns Historical Society and Fan Club. Although there was still an affection for the team, it took a while for the organization to gain some stability.
We had at least 10 gala last dinners. We were going out of business more than some of those carpet companies, you know. I'm telling you, it was really ridiculous. We tried to drop it, but you know what saved it? The players. The players. God bless them. They begged us to continue. And these fellows supported us. Maybe that does explain the wonderful love and affection we felt for each other over the 35 years.
We would have 20, 25 former members of the Browns coming to our luncheon. But slowly, of our 764 men who played for the Browns, today there's only 10 living.
As a tribute to both players and fans, Bill Borst, Bill Rogers, and St. Louis Browns Historical Society and Fan Club Board President Ed Wheatley began to gather the team's history, memories, photos, and memorabilia, and transform them into a book titled The St. Louis Browns, The Story of a Beloved Team.
The whole thing was about taking people back in time and rebuilding this memory.
We always had fans who would show up at these dinners and luncheons and see the old players and shake hands. They'd get their autographs. Basically, they took that experience home with them in their minds until the next year. And so I think having the book was a way of really bringing a concrete connection to the Browns.
When we introduced our book at the St. Louis County Library Author Series, and the auditorium was not only every seat was taken, but they were down the halls in the back listening. 300 plus people showed up on this evening. And from there was we were continuing to be invited. Can you come speak at this? Can you come speak here? And it just became this avalanche of memories. People, you know, we were touching them in the heart. You know, they would come out and they would bring their treasures. And when I say treasures, it might be an autographed ball. It might be a scorecard, a program, or something. And they would tell me, this has been sitting in my drawer for 60 years, 70 years. Now, did I think what has happened would ever happen? No, I thought we would stimulate, but I think we erupted this Browns memories. And, you know, that then led to the evolution of our first film. The story of the St. Louis Browns, a team baseball forgot. Well, it's not a team baseball forgot anymore.
Fan club membership soared, and former players found themselves back in the spotlight. And 35 years after the idea of a Browns Historical Society and Fan Club was conceived in Cooperstown, the film was selected for a special screening in the Baseball Hall of Fame's annual film festival. But the longevity of the fan club and the overwhelming response to the book and film begs the question, what was so memorable about the Browns? For a team that was responsible for defining St. Louis as last in the American League, it certainly wasn't their record that endeared them to the loyal fans who showed up to watch them play at Sportsman's Park from 1902 through 1953.
People in this country, they like to root for the underdogs. And if there ever was an underdog, the Browns were the underdogs.
Well, we look back at the Cubs. The Cubs hadn't won a World Series in 100 years, and they called them the lovable losers. And I guess in some ways the Browns were lovable losers.
I never knew they were that bad.
They were losers, but they've had some great players over the years. And I like the hustle.
If you were a Brownie fan, you just thought next year's going to be better, but somehow it just didn't work out. Darn it.
They kept trying. They never had the financial backing that the Cardinals had, but they were always there giving their effort, and the players were probably more down to earth.
They all came and sat down with me and called me by name.
It just seemed a little freer to me in acceptance.
Nursing homes. I've gone to a few with Ed, and these people are 70, 80, 90, and they remember the Browns. It amazes me.
To more fully grasp the lingering passion for this long-lost team, it's important to understand the times and the city in which they played.
When you say Browns, you are saying the first half of the 20th century and everything that conjures up.
St. Louis was the fourth largest city in the country. It was a condensed city. You know, people lived in apartments here in St. Louis. We call them flats. West County, you know, Chesterfield, and those areas. I mean, that was all farmland. You got to remember, most of the people who were alive when the Browns played, they grew up in the Great Depression. They grew up in World War II, where there were food shortages and rationing, men going off to war, many men not coming back.
Baseball was an escape, right? From war, it was an escape from the realities of poverty. Baseball became a way for people to reinvest in something bigger than themselves.
As Americans navigated through these difficult decades, a love for the national pastime was something that remained constant. The comforting sound of the ballgame on the radio, providing a sense of normalcy in uncertain times.
1926, we didn't have a radio. Somebody gave my brother a crystal set that had to be attached to somebody else's radio. My neighbor allowed him to attach his crystal set, and I sat in the kitchen sink to broadcast the baseball game to my mother.
A lot of the houses didn't have air conditioning, and the windows were open with the screens and the baseball games going on. and you could ride your bike or you could be out playing, and you would always keep track of the baseball game because no matter where you were, the baseball game was on.
But there's nothing like experiencing the sights, smells, and sounds of a live game. The Browns had followed the trend of other cities like Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and had renovated Sportsman's Park in 1909 with steel and concrete.
My grandmother would talk about going to Sportsman's Park. It sounded like she was talking about going to Disneyland or something. You know, it's like you were just sitting there with peanuts watching a baseball game. What was? But for her, in a simpler time, in a simpler place, it was an elegant game that was allowed everyone to participate.
I could get on the streetcar at the Loop at University City for a dime, go down to Grand Avenue, and I had a transfer and go to the ballpark on a dime.
I'm an old country boy. Live 60 miles south of St. Louis, but I had relatives who lived in South St. Louis, just on Ohio Avenue, just off of Jefferson. And my Uncle Jack first took me to the ballpark. I had never seen grass that green, never, and it was gorgeous.
My dad and I would go to a lot of Brownie games. He was an avid fan, season ticket holder and stockholder, and we especially loved doubleheaders on Sundays, because we'd get up early and go to Mass, get home at 9 o'clock, and I'd put my little Brownie uniform on, get in his, back then, 53 blue Buick Roadmaster, drive down to Carter Carburetor lot, and we would walk down Dotier Street. If we didn't walk on it, we'd walk in the alley behind it and up like a fire escape, knock on a door. It's like a speakeasy to a bar that was up there. It wasn't supposed to be open on Sunday. They'd open, oh, it's Eddie and his kid, let him in. So Dad would go to the bar and I'd go play the pinball machine. Then we'd go to the game.
We always went and sat in the bleachers. I think only one time we sat in the grandstand and it's upper deck. And I think it was $1.50. And the bleachers was like 20 cents or 15 cents or something like that.
Of course, when the Browns were home, they didn't draw very much, so you could just pay general admission, go anywhere in the park that you wanted.
If there was a foul ball, I could just walk to it because it wasn't that crowded.
The one thing that could not happen is that African Americans or blacks, we could not go into the grandstand. The only place we could sit is center field bleachers or the right field pavilion. Ladies' Day, they were not recognized as ladies.
Sportsman's Park was one of the last ballparks to have segregated sections and open up grandstand seating to all in May of 1944. However, the Browns made sure that the city's children, no matter what race or gender, had an opportunity to enjoy a ball game.
One of the things the Browns did for kids who were having pretty good grades and all, they supplied them with tickets to come see the ball games. Cardinals did too, but the Cardinals' knothole section was way up on the top level of the left field pavilions, as high as you could get. The Browns were in right field pavilion.
And I'd go down there, I had my Brownie pass, and I'd get in.
My dad, the Cardinals fan, he would go to Browns games, as he admitted, to see the other team.
I'd go to see the Yankees play or the Detroit Tigers, go to see Joe DiMaggio play.
And after the game, the kids would go out and run around the bases and slide in the home plate and play like we were, you know, I mean, imagine we were playing for the Browns.
Sportsman's Park was built to be one of the best, most innovative stadiums, trying out new ideas like a canvas roof to prevent rain delays and an electronic scoreboard. After the Browns were sold, it remained home to the Cardinals until it was torn down and the team moved downtown to a new Busch Stadium in 1966.
Now it's the home for the Herbert Hoover Boys Club. It was fun to go out there and watch these kids running around this same infield that all those ball players through the years played on.
After the game, everybody come over and settle up their bets, and there were no hurry, and the beer man had a few beers left, so then we'd get home, Dad would barbecue, and once in a while a Brownie player would come over, because back then they didn't make the kind of money they're making now.
Ball players made the money that the average worker was making. So if you were a rookie in the major leagues in 1950, you made $5,000 for 6 months of work.
Not only were the salaries unrecognizable from the multi-million-dollar contracts signed by athletes today, but the players themselves were a different breed. Despite the economic difficulties the country experienced through 2 world wars and the Great Depression, baseball was still seen as a necessity, raising morale and providing an escape from everyday life. Instead of driving to games from their mansions in expensive cars, many Browns players lived within walking distance of Sportsman's Park and were a part of the community, hanging out after games to chat with fans, the scent of hot dogs and beer still lingering in the air.
They didn't live opulent lives. They lived just down the street. And it was nothing for the players to just walk out of the stadium, knowing there's a throng of kids out there waiting for them, and they would walk to their home. And it was the same thing for the visiting players who would generally stay at the hotels up the street. I've heard so many stories about people just walking with Babe Ruth to the hotel, and he'd be signing and talking and playing. You know, Dizzy Dean was one regularly. I've heard from so many people out playing in the streets with the kids.
Back then, there was only one entrance to the stadium. The picnic table was outside the Brownie dugout. I always sat at the Brownies table.
When the first film completed, it was on TV, I got a phone call from Gert's daughter. It just said, hey, I want to tell you a story. Gert Slama, early teens, would take streetcars from University City all the way down to Sportsman's Park. She was a baseball player, but she was actually a pitcher in her local community. And she was renowned, you know, her love of baseball, whether it was playing or going to the games and just resonating with these players. She loved the Browns. They were her team. Harlan Clift was her favorite ball player. Harlan Clift kept talking to her and said, I'm going to bring this girl I'm thinking about marrying. I want you to sit with her, and then I want your opinion. Think about this, a teenager. I want your opinion if she's good enough for me. She would make these special scorecards, all signed by all these great players. Because you got to remember the one thing about when the Browns played, it wasn't just the Browns. They were playing the New York Yankees, the Detroit Tigers, the Cleveland Indians. I mean, one of my favorite stories was one day this big man came walking up to her and said, hey, kiddo, you never asked me to sign, why not? She looked up at him and said, I'm afraid of you. You're so big. The guy was Babe Ruth. He sits down right there on the bench with her and starts signing.
While baseball players enjoyed a certain amount of celebrity, most weren't pulling anything close to the salary of Babe Ruth and often had to pick up second jobs in local businesses to make extra money.
My grandfather owned a tavern, and if you served Falstaff in your tavern, you were a Browns fan. If you served Budweiser, you were a Cardinals fan, and my grandfather was a die-hard Falstaff man. Vern Stevens tended bar at my grandfather's tavern. The reason why my dad liked him is because when Grandma and Grandpa weren't looking, Vern Stevens would sneak my dad a little bit of beer.
Barnstorming games also provided a way to make extra cash in the off-season.
They would charge usually a certain amount of money per car as they drove in, and then the Athletic Association would take half of the pot, and the other half would go to the Major League ball players, and they would divide it. This particular time, Satchel Paige was pitching in this game, and Ned Garver was playing, my relative Hank Arf was playing, and they played out at Baldwin Ballpark. Played late in October, and it was a cold night, the wind was blowing, and many of the people that came to see that actually parked their cars along the left field line, and as my dad told me, it was almost as if they were watching a outdoor theater.
During World War II, baseball was the second job for some players, as their full-time war effort factory work only allowed them to play on the weekends. Thanks to the demand for workers, fans were also finding less time to spend at the ballpark. Night games and Sunday doubleheaders were scheduled to allow shift workers the chance to relax at a ball game.
So many people were in service, so I worked in my stepfather's drugstore during the war. I got Sunday afternoon off, so I'd catch a bus and then catch a streetcar and see the games. It's usually a doubleheader.
The draft not only took a toll on the workforce, but also on team rosters. Many teams, including the Browns, had to make do without their best players. But it was in the midst of international conflict and economic uncertainty that the Browns won their first and only pennant. In an unbelievable twist of fate that some might argue sealed their fate, they would face off against the St. Louis Cardinals in the 1944 World Series.
They finally make it to the top. They win their only pennant in their 52-year history. And who do they have to play? The St. Louis Cardinals. Stan Musial makes the comment that we had been in the World Series in 42 and 43, but yet we're the underdogs.
All the Cardinal fans around her grew up and make fun of the Browns, which made my mother love them even more. They were hapless, which then makes 1944 an amazing event where it's like somehow, some way, possibly a little bit thanks to the war, but whatever, the Browns and the Cardinals are in the same World Series.
There'd only been two other instances in 1921 and 22 where the New York Giants and New York Yankees played each other and shared the Polo Grounds. So this was the third and last time this situation would happen. The irony of the thing was Hollywood had just come out with the movie with Judy Garland, Meet Me in St. Louis. It was coming true that fall because in October you had to meet me in St. Louis to play the World Series at Sportsman's Park.
I would love to have been alive at that time and be here for every one of those games, watching people out on the streets, in the taverns, wherever, celebrating one team or the other, but everybody also knowing that the entire attention of the sports world was focused on St. Louis, Missouri, nowhere else, not New York, not Chicago, not Detroit, none of those big cities. It would have been right here in St. Louis, and I would love to have went back to that 1 week in time, and I would have enjoyed the heck out of that, you know. I would have rooted for the Cardinals, I'll admit.
That World Series. I was born on the last day. Dad's youngest brother, Babe Martin, played for the Browns. The last day of the World Series, my dad was in the Navy, was in Jacksonville, Florida, and Uncle Babe called him and he said, I've got some good news and some bad news for you. And my dad said, well, give me the bad news first. He said, the Browns lost the World Series. And then he said, well, what is the good news? He said, we got a baby girl.
You know, the Browns could very well have won that World Series. They won the first game. A couple bad defensive plays in the second game cost them the second game. They won the third game. They made a few more errors in the fourth game. So the series is summed up as a series of strikeouts. Both team pitchers were just fantastic. It set a record for strikeouts in a series. So it was strikeouts and errors. The Browns committed too many errors and gave the Cardinals too many runs.
And he had all kinds of stuff in that case, and I said, what's your most prized possession, Mr. Crump? And he went over and he got a certificate that was signed by the President of the United States, John Kennedy, because he worked on the space missions as a chemist. I mean, here's a man that played baseball with major league players, and I asked him, what is your most prized possession? And he shows me something that he did in his vocation. He's one of those guys that fought for our country, played baseball, and is a chemist. It's on the GI Bill. I mean, there's history there.
Building community through preserving history is the foundation the St. Louis Browns Historical Society has built on since its inception. Recently, their efforts went towards restoring a unique piece of the Browns and baseball's past. After the glow of their 1944 pennant win, the Browns hoped to keep up the momentum, but they faced the same predicament as many other teams.
The Browns had, in 1944, when they won the pennant, they had a couple guys that worked in war factories and could only play on weekends, and then they had a lot of players that were in service. Every team faced the same predicament. How did you feel the team, hopefully competitive, in spite of the conditions?
Pete Gray, a minor league MVP, was brought up to the majors for the Browns' 1945 season. Eager to serve his country, Gray had tried to enlist, but was refused by the service. So the one-armed player took the opportunity of a lifetime.
It was amazing to watch him catch the ball. He'd flip the ball and the glove up in the air and catch the ball and make the throw. Here's a one-armed, left-handed guy taking infield practice at shortstop. Now that sounds nearly impossible, but he was very agile and very dexterous and fast.
Gray's unique glove was designed for a quick transition between catching and throwing, and is currently under the care of the National Baseball Hall of Fame, where a contribution from the St. Louis Browns Historical Society is helping to preserve it.
It was real flimsy, and he just held it on the fingertips so he could drop it off easy. And while he was waiting for the ball to come down, he was taking a stride towards the infield so that he could have his arm back here and was ready to make the throw. He made the most of what he had, but it was just a shame that he was overshadowed by the war, and then the next year some of the people in service came back, and so that kind of ended his career in the major leagues.
But Gray, despite a lifelong regret of not being able to fight for his country, ended up being a source of inspiration to many of the soldiers returning home, and an example of determination to a little boy who never forgot it.
It gave me a lasting impression. I guess that's just proof that you could do anything you wanted to if you wanted to bad enough. My dad was a Brown fan. He managed the baseball team in Columbia, and he was heartbroken when I got crippled when I was 2 years old, and then he died when I was 9, and he never got to see me play sports. But I got to play baseball and basketball in high school, and I played 5 years of independent ball after high school. I find it a pleasure to have seen him play, a privilege. He was tough.
The difficulty of dealing with memory loss and memory problems is you have to have some triggers.
Recalling his father's lifelong love for baseball inspired Chris Lowy to give him the Browns book for Christmas. It not only became a way for father and son to reconnect through Joe's memorabilia from his visits to Sportsman's Park, but also provided some long-term memory stimulation.
These are positive memories in my dad's life.
Yeah.
And as we get into the elder years of Dad's life, you know, he's having some trouble with memory. It's amazing to go back and talk about the Browns. It's like Dad's back there. He's 16 again, 17. So I kind of, you know, get him back for a little while. And then I get to learn a little bit about the history of the time. So what was it like for that 16 or 17-year-old kid to negotiate the streetcars and go to Sportsman's Park